His horse lived in a marble stable with an ivory manger. It was served oats mixed with gold flakes, and it was about to be appointed a consul of Rome. This wasn't a madman's fantasy. It was the reality of the Emperor Caligula, and that was just the beginning. Welcome, seeker, to the Obscuria vault. Today, we unseal the file on a man whose name has become synonymous with depravity, Gaius Caesar Germanicus. You will not recognize that name. History has given him another, Caligula. But before the monster, there was a boy born into the most celebrated family in Rome, the son of the beloved General Germanicus. As a toddler, he was a mascot for his father's legions, dressed in a miniature soldier's uniform, complete with tiny military boots or caliga. The soldiers adored him, nicknaming him Caligula, Little Boot. It was a name spoken with love, a symbol of hope for the future of Rome. That hope died in the dusty plains of Syria. Young Caligula, just 7 years old, was there when his father Germanicus fell, violently ill, and died, whispering of poison and betrayal on his deathbed. This was Caligula's first lesson in the true nature of Roman power. The second lesson would be even more brutal. He was brought back to Rome, only to watch the paranoid Emperor Tiberius turn on his family. His mother, Agrippina, and his 2 older brothers were declared enemies of the state. They were arrested, exiled to barren islands, and systematically starved to death. Caligula, the last surviving son, lived under the shadow of the executioner's axe. He survived by becoming a master of deception, hiding all emotion behind a blank, unreadable mask, never giving Tiberius a reason to see him as a threat. When Tiberius finally died, the people of Rome rejoiced as if a plague had lifted. And when the 24-year-old Caligula was named emperor, the celebration was ecstatic. He was the son of the great Germanicus, the last of a noble line, a handsome and charismatic youth who represented a clean break from the terror of the past. His first acts as emperor were a golden age. He freed political prisoners, banished informers, abolished unpopular taxes, and hosted the most spectacular gladiatorial games the city had ever seen. He was hailed by the Senate and adored by the people. For 7 months, it seemed Rome's hope had been justified. For 7 months, the monster slept. Then, in October of 37 AD, Caligula fell ill. Roman sources are vague, calling it a brain fever that left him bedridden for weeks, racked by delirium. The empire held its breath, praying for the recovery of their beloved leader. They should have prayed for him to die. When Caligula finally rose from his sickbed, the man who returned was not the same one who had fallen ill. The benevolent prince was gone, replaced by a specter of paranoia and cruelty. Roman historian Suetonius wrote that the illness had affected his mind as much as his body. The shift was immediate and terrifying. His first act was to order the deaths of those closest to him: his father-in-law, his cousin, and the Praetorian prefect who had secured his throne. All were forced to commit suicide based on whispered suspicions of conspiracy during his illness. The treason trials he had once abolished were brought back with a vengeance, now used not for justice, but as a weapon to seize the wealth of any senator who grew too rich or too popular. The mask he had worn as a child to survive Tiberius had now become his true face. The Caligula of history, the legend of depravity, was now fully awake. His reign became a surreal performance of absolute power, beginning with his own divinity. He wasn't just an emperor, he was a living god. He built temples dedicated to his own worship, and in the ultimate act of blasphemy, he began replacing the heads on the statues of revered gods like Jupiter with his own likeness. His family life became a public spectacle of perversion. He was accused by Roman historians of having incestuous relationships with all 3 of his sisters, treating them as his wives at public banquets. His favorite, Drusilla, was declared his equal. When she died, he had her deified, making it a capital crime for anyone in Rome not to mourn her with sufficient intensity. His spending was as insane as his ego. He bankrupted the Roman treasury on vanity projects. He constructed a 2-mile floating bridge of boats across the Bay of Baiae for no other reason than to ride his horse across it, wearing the armor of Alexander the Great. He built 2 massive, opulent pleasure barges on Lake Nemi, complete with marble floors, heating, and plumbing, which served as floating palaces for his debaucheries. When the money ran out, his solutions became even more depraved. He turned the imperial palace into a public brothel, forcing the wives and daughters of senators to serve as prostitutes, with the profits going directly to him. This wasn't just for money, it was the ultimate humiliation of the Roman aristocracy, a statement that everything and everyone belonged to him. He treated the Senate, the most powerful men in Rome, with a contempt that bordered on performance art. He would make them run for miles beside his chariot, dressed in their formal togas. At his banquets, he would force them to wait on his table like common slaves. And then there was the horse. Incitatus was his favorite steed, but in Caligula's mind, the horse was more than an animal. It was a reflection of his own greatness, and a tool to show his utter contempt for humanity. The horse was given a stable of marble, an ivory manger, and a collar of precious jewels. It was attended by 18 servants and was a regular guest at state dinners, where it was served wine in golden goblets. But the final insult to Rome was his stated intention to make Incitatus a consul, the highest elected office in the Republic. He was telling the world that his horse was more fit to govern than any human senator. It was the act of a man who saw no difference between man and beast, law and whim, reality and his own divine will. His madness spilled into military affairs. During a campaign in the north, he famously abandoned a planned invasion of Britain. Instead, he declared war on the sea itself. He drew up his legions in battle formation on the beach and commanded them to attack the waves with their swords and spears. After this victory, he ordered his soldiers to collect seashells, which he called the spoils of the ocean, and carried them back to Rome to be displayed in his triumphal parade. For nearly 4 years, Rome endured the reign of its monster god. The fear was absolute, but a man who treats the world's most powerful people like insects will eventually get stung. The constant humiliation, the threat of arbitrary execution, and the sheer unpredictability of their emperor became too much for the Praetorian Guard, his own elite bodyguards. The conspiracy was led by Cassius Chaerea, an officer whom Caligula relentlessly mocked for his high-pitched, supposedly effeminate voice. Day after day, Caligula would ask Chaerea for the secret password, and when Chaerea gave it, Caligula would respond with a lewd, insulting name. It was a petty cruelty, but it was the one that sealed his fate. On January 24, 41 AD, during the Palatine Games, the conspirators struck. As Caligula left the theater through a secluded palace corridor, Chaerea approached him. When the emperor gave another lewd insult, Chaerea drew his sword and struck, shouting, "Take this." He was immediately joined by other guards and senators. The boy who had survived the purge of his family was now cornered by his own protectors. He was stabbed over 30 times. His last words, according to the historian Suetonius, were a scream, "I am still alive!" The assassins made sure he wasn't. To extinguish his line completely, they went to the palace, where they found Caligula's wife and his infant daughter, Julia Drusilla. The child's head was smashed against a wall. The purge was total. The death of Caligula was celebrated, but it left Rome with a terrifying question. Was he truly insane? Did the fever break his mind, turning a good prince into a monster? Or was he something else? A victim of history. His name blackened by the senators he humiliated, who wrote the history books after he was gone. Some historians argue his actions, while extreme, were a calculated political theater, a brutal but rational attempt to consolidate absolute power and destroy the authority of the old aristocracy. Was making his horse a consul a sign of madness, or a genius political statement that the old offices were meaningless before the emperor's will, we will likely never know the full truth. The records in the vault are filled with the accounts of his enemies, but whether he was a clinical madman or a rational monster, the result was the same. Caligula's story is the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when a broken child, taught from a young age that his life is worthless, is suddenly given absolute unquestionable power over all of humanity. He becomes not a god but a void, consuming everything and everyone around him until there is nothing left.